The safety net. On the 7th of August 2016, 10-year-old Caleb Thomas Schwab, son of Kansas State Representative Scott Schwab, rode verrückt at Schlitterbahn Water Park in Kansas City during a special day for state lawmakers and their families. Verrückt was German for insane, marketed as the world's tallest water slide at about 168 feet, and Caleb sat in the front of a three-person raft with two adult women behind him. Riders climbed 264 steps to reach the top. The raft cleared the near-vertical first drop, then hit the second hump. Investigators say the design never accounted for the extreme speeds and combined weights, and the raft launched off the flume and went airborne. That safety structure became the killer. As the raft left the slide, Caleb's head and neck struck one of the metal hoops. Police initially described the injury as a fatal neck injury, and subsequent investigations and reporting indicated that the metal support hoop struck Caleb's neck and effectively decapitated him. The two women riding behind Caleb were injured. One suffered a broken jaw, and the other sustained a facial bone fracture and needed stitches. Prosecutors said Schlitterbahn used crude trial-and-error methods instead of proper engineering calculations, and that Verrückt had caused more than a dozen documented injuries before Caleb's ride. After Caleb's death, Schlitterbahn announced in November 2016 that Verrückt would be permanently closed and removed from the tower, and news reports state the Schwab family received nearly $20 million in legal settlements with multiple parties. Clogging. Quimby Galati, a 17-year-old senior from Napa High School, was at Waterworld USA in Concord, California on the 2nd of June 1997 on a graduation trip with hundreds of classmates. The Bonsai Pipeline was a 3-story fiberglass tube slide built for single riders, one at a time. Napa seniors had a year-end tradition of trying to clog it, packing as many bodies into the tube as they could to set a school record. Approximately 33 students crowded onto the Bonsai Pipeline slide at once, far exceeding its design for single riders. Witnesses said they ignored an attendance order to go one at a time. The Consumer Product Safety Commission later estimated that the crowd created a load of roughly 5,000 to 6,000 pounds, about 4 times what the slide had been designed to safely support. A single bolt failed at a flange joint. That failure pulled the remaining bolts through the fiberglass like a zipper, and a 20-foot section of tube sheared away, roughly 30 to 40 feet above the ground. Witnesses described bodies falling out of the sky onto concrete, wood supports, and landscaping. Quimby was ejected in the collapse. The coroner's office reported a crushed chest. Later reporting cited a skull fracture and internal trauma. She died within hours. 32 people were injured in the collapse, according to officials. A $10 part. On the night of the 9th of June, 1991, around 9 p.m., 21-year-old Timothy Binning was standing at a shallow decorative pond near the beer garden at Kings Island near Mason, Ohio. It wasn't a ride pool, just a landscaped pond with submerged aerator pumps to circulate the water and control algae. One of those pumps had faulty grounding, and it was leaking electricity into the water. There was no ground fault circuit interrupter on the circuit, a safety device that cost about $10 and would have cut the power the instant current leaked. Binning was splashing at the water when the shock hit him, dropping him unconscious into the pond. Then came the rescue. William Haithcote, a 20-year-old visitor, Daryl Robertson, a 20-year-old Kings Island security guard, went in too. The moment they entered the electrified water, both were caught in the current. Investigators determined that William Haithcote died from electrocution in the pond, while Daryl Robertson was knocked unconscious by the electrical current and subsequently drowned. Both men were transported to University Hospital in Cincinnati, where they were pronounced dead. Binning survived with burns. OSHA cited Kings Island for 7 safety violations, including improper grounding, lack of ground fault circuit protection, and inadequate railings, and imposed fines totaling $23,500. A federal official said the $10 device would have prevented both deaths. 93 feet. A 14-year-old boy was swimming on the 16th of August 1985 at a public pool facility in Ogden, Utah, that included a water slide, along with his younger brother and 2 friends. They weren't on the slide, they were playing in one of the receiving pools at the bottom, a splash basin only 4 feet deep. The pool bottom had 3 submerged drain pipes feeding the recirculation system, and the middle one was uncovered. The boy was hanging onto the edge of the pool with his hands, his feet dangling directly over that open drain opening. He let go. The CDC report states that the instant he released the edge, he disappeared into the pipe. The pump suction pulled his whole body through the uncovered intake, and there was no grate, no anti-entrapment cover, nothing to stop it. The suction carried him 93 feet horizontally through the recirculation line before he lodged at a 90-degree vertical bend inside the pump house. Rescuers located and removed him from the pipe in approximately 15 minutes. Resuscitation failed. The autopsy ruled the cause of death drowning. The case became a landmark in pool safety literature, a gap in the tube. Davi Lucas de Miranda, an 8-year-old from Conselheiro Lafayette in Minas Gerais, Brazil, was visiting De Roma Aqua Park in Caldas Novas with his father and baby brother on February 13, 2022. The attraction was the volcano, 4 enclosed tube slides emerging from a volcano-themed tower. The volcano was closed and under maintenance. 3 of its 4 tubes had sections physically removed for repairs, leaving open gaps mid-course. It should have been sealed off, but investigators found the barrier at the base of the stairs had been removed on the park manager's orders. One gate reportedly had only a piece of tape across it. After a trip to the bathroom, Davi ran off alone, passed the poor isolation, climbed the tower, and entered a tube. He slid down until he reached a section where the tube had been removed and fell from the slide structure, dropping around 15 meters and striking the supporting scaffolding before landing near a shallow pool. He was rescued alive and airlifted to a hospital in Goiânia, but went into cardiac arrest and died that day. Forensic examiners confirmed he did not drown. The trauma came from the fall and impacts. An inch or two. Kostadin Yankov, a 19-year-old Bulgarian biochemistry student at Oxford, took part in an extreme sports event on the 24th of November, 2002, at Middlemore Water Park, near Bridgewater, Somerset. The attraction sat on land beside the water park, a replica medieval trebuchet, a human catapult built to fling strapped-in riders through the air into a suspended safety net about 100 feet away. The machine had a history. In 1999, a 44-year-old woman fractured her pelvis being fired from it. On this day, about 20 club members lined up, and Yankov was the 6th to be launched. He was strapped into a harness on the trebuchet's arm and launched through the air toward a safety net suspended some distance away. He didn't fly far enough. The organizer said Yankov missed the net by an inch or two, clearing the trajectory short and hitting the edge and the ground instead. The net itself never failed, he simply never reached it. He was airlifted to Frenchay Hospital in Bristol, where he died from multiple injuries. 2 organizers, David Aitkenhead and Richard Wicks, were charged with manslaughter. At Bristol Crown Court, the judge cleared both men. The court found the device had worked as designed, and no specific act amounted to criminal negligence. No one was convicted. The Boulder. George Larson Jr., 19, rode the Alpine Slide at Action Park in Vernon Township, New Jersey, on July 8, 1980. The slide was a gravity ride, small wheeled carts with a handbrake sent down a long concrete track cut into a steep hillside. The ride was already notorious. State records later logged 26 head injuries and 14 fractures on it in a single 1984 to 1985 stretch. Larson started down the concrete chute. As he descended, Larson's cart left the concrete track, and he was thrown from the sled down the hillside, tumbling about 25 feet down the embankment head first. Then came the boulder. He struck his head on a rock formation that regulators had previously told the park to remove. Accounts describe a crushed skull. He was rushed to the hospital, lapsed into a coma, and died 8 days later, on the 16th of July, 1980, of catastrophic head trauma. It was Action Park's first ride death. The Christmas Eve Catastrophe. Okay, so for the first story, we rewind back to 1998. Christmas Eve, 6 p.m. at Disneyland in Anaheim, California, to be exact. The sailing ship Columbia, a massive multi-ton replica of an 18th century vessel, was docking after its final voyage of the day. On the dock, 33-year-old Luann Fee Dawson was waiting with his wife, ready to continue their holiday celebration. A cast member on the dock grabbed the mooring rope to secure the ship, wrapping it around a heavy cast iron cleat bolted into the dock. But the cast member pulled too hard. The metal cleat, weakened by years of corrosion and inadequate maintenance, sheared off its bolts. It became a projectile. The 8-inch piece of cast iron flew through the air at high speed, striking Luann Dawson directly in the head. The impact was so severe that it caused massive blunt force trauma, crushing his skull and torso. He was killed instantly, collapsing in front of his wife. Bro, if one hair on my head knew that a piece of the dock was about to go airborne, I'd be in another zip code. But the horror wasn't over. The same metal cleat ricocheted off Luann and struck his wife in the face, shattering her cheekbones, nose, and eye socket, causing permanent facial disfigurement. The cast member who had pulled the rope was also injured by the flying debris. 3 victims from a single catastrophic failure. Children were crying, parents were covering their eyes. The ship just sat there, motionless, as paramedics worked on the victims. An investigation by OSHA later revealed that Disney's maintenance and safety procedures were woefully inadequate. The bolts on the cleat were corroded, and the docking procedures were improper. The Dawson family filed a wrongful death lawsuit, detailing Luann's instant death, his wife's permanent disfigurement, and the emotional trauma of it all. Disney, facing a mountain of evidence of their own negligence, settled for an undisclosed but undoubtedly massive sum. The incident forced a complete overhaul of the park's safety protocols. All the dock cleats were replaced, and docking procedures were completely rewritten. But for the Dawson family, the damage was done. Luann's wife would spend years undergoing reconstructive surgery, a permanent, painful reminder of the day the happiest place on Earth became the site of a Christmas Eve tragedy. The Matterhorn's second victim. All right, next up we're heading to a Disneyland classic, the Matterhorn bobsleds. It's a high-speed coaster that sends you careening through the icy caverns of a man-made mountain. On June 3, 1984, 48-year-old Dolly Young was on that ride with her family. At some point during the ride's sharp turns and sudden drops, she was ejected from her bobsled. Dolly landed on the track, likely dazed and injured, but she had no time to react. The bobsled directly behind her, traveling at nearly 30 miles per hour, struck her with incredible force. The impact crushed her skull and torso, killing her instantly. But the horror didn't end there. The bobsled that hit her became trapped on top of her body, pinning her to the track. The ride's safety system kicked in, stopping every bobsled in the mountain, leaving the passengers in the car that struck her sitting directly above her crushed remains. Rescue crews had to evacuate the entire ride before they could even get to Dolly. They had to carefully lift the bobsled off her body before she could be pronounced dead. The incident was a horrifying echo of a death that had happened 20 years earlier, in 1964, when a 15-year-old boy named Mark Maples was also ejected from the ride and killed. The fact that it took 2 deaths, 2 decades apart, for Disney to finally install adequate safety restraints on the Matterhorn is just insane. The image of a bobsled, stopped in the dark with a crushed body pinned beneath it, is a grim reminder that sometimes the magic is just a thin veneer over corporate negligence. The slow death on the Jungle Cruise. This next one, is just infuriating. On August 22nd, 2021, 66-year-old Joanne Aguilar, who used a wheelchair, wanted to ride the Jungle Cruise with her daughters. The wheelchair-accessible boats weren't available, but cast members told her it was fine. They'd help her onto a regular boat. They did. She enjoyed the 8-minute ride, at the skipper's terrible jokes. But when she tried to get off the boat, she fell, and her leg snapped. A clean break of the femur. Now, a broken leg is bad, but what happened next, according to the lawsuit filed by her daughters, is what makes this one of the worst. As Joanne lay on the dock in excruciating pain, the cast members allegedly laughed. They stood around and laughed at an injured 66-year-old woman. It took several minutes for them to even call for paramedics. That fall started a 5-month-long nightmare. Joanne had surgery to pin her femur, but the wound got infected. The infection spread to the bone, a condition called osteomyelitis, which is notoriously difficult to treat. She spent months in a rehab center in constant pain, unable to walk. The infection then spread to her bloodstream, causing sepsis. Her organs began to fail. On January 29, 2022, 5 months after that fall, Joanne Aguilar died of septic shock. Her daughters filed a wrongful death lawsuit, and Disney's response? They denied everything. In court filings, they claimed they weren't at fault and that Aguilar's injuries were due to her own negligence. They are actually trying to blame the victim. The lawsuit is still ongoing, but the fact remains. A woman died a slow, agonizing death that started with a broken leg that should never have happened in the first place. All because Disney employees couldn't be bothered to wait for a wheelchair-accessible boat, and then allegedly found it funny when their negligence caused a woman to get seriously hurt. It's a level of corporate indifference that frankly, is just gross. The Monorail Skin-Scraper. Okay, let's rewind to the swinging 60s. It's grad night at Disneyland in Anaheim, California, June 1966. The park is buzzing with teenagers celebrating the end of high school. But 19-year-old Thomas Cleveland wasn't a graduate. He was just a guy trying to sneak into the park for the party. And he had a really, really bad plan. Instead of, buying a ticket, Thomas decided to climb the 16-foot-high chain-link fence and get onto the monorail track. The monorail, the sleek, silent highway in the sky, was the first of its kind in the Western Hemisphere, gliding on a concrete beam 20 feet above the ground. Thomas figured he could just walk the beam into the park. A security guard spotted him from a tower and yelled at him to get down. Thomas, realizing he was caught, started to jump. But it was too late. The monorail, nearly silent and traveling at 15 to 20 miles per hour, was already upon him. He was struck by the train and wedged underneath it. The operator didn't even know he'd hit anything. The monorail kept going, dragging Thomas along the track for about 40 feet. Now, 40 feet doesn't sound that far until you realize the track is basically a giant concrete cheese grater. By the time the train was stopped, most of his skin had been scraped from his body. Yeah, he was, for all intents and purposes, flayed alive. When the emergency crews arrived, they found a scene so gruesome it was hard to comprehend. Thomas was still alive, but just barely. His body was so mangled, with his skull crushed and bones broken, that he was pronounced dead at the scene. The image of his body, wedged under the monorail 20 feet in the air with a 40-foot blood trail behind it, haunted rescue workers for years. In the aftermath, Disney increased security around the monorail track, adding more fencing and warning signs. But for Thomas Cleveland, it was a brutal end to a very stupid plan. He died a horrific, painful death, all to save about $5 on a Disneyland ticket. The Space Mountain Body Count. It's a classic, a high-speed indoor roller coaster that whips you through the pitch-black darkness of space. It's also, statistically, one of the deadliest rides in Disneyland history, with at least 5 deaths to its name. Yes, seriously. But these aren't your typical fell-out-of-the-ride stories. These are weirder. Let me explain exactly what happened. In 1979, at Walt Disney World in Florida, a 31-year-old woman named Cheryl got off the ride feeling sick. She couldn't walk, and her husband had to carry her to the first aid station. She died in the hospital a few days later. The cause? Cheryl had an undiagnosed heart tumor the size of a golf ball. The violent shaking and G-forces of Space Mountain caused the tumor to dislodge from her heart. The tumor traveled through her bloodstream, entered her brain, and killed her. I mean, what are the odds? You go on a roller coaster and it literally shakes a tumor loose in your body. It's like a 1 in a billion cosmic level bad luck. Then there's the case of James Higgins. In 1985, at Disneyland in California, James was riding Space Mountain when he was allegedly thrown from his seat during a sharp turn. He fell, struck the track, and his spinal cord was severed. He was instantly paralyzed from the waist down. He survived, but spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair, requiring 24-hour care. He sued Disney, but a jury ruled against him, buying Disney's argument that he must have stood up during the ride. And it gets worse. In 2000, at Tokyo Disneyland, a 9-year-old boy was found unconscious at the end of the ride. He died 3 months later from a congenital heart defect that no one knew he had. And back at Walt Disney World in 2006, a 73-year-old man lost consciousness on the ride and died in the hospital. The cause was, again, a pre-existing heart condition. You know, the thing about Space Mountain is that it's not a flaw in the ride itself that's the problem. It's the perfect storm of darkness, speed, and G-forces that seems to find any hidden weakness in the human body and exploit it. It's a ride that, for a handful of unlucky people across the globe, turned a fun trip to space into a one-way ticket to the morgue. The 8-year death of Brandon Zucker. Roger Rabbit's Cartoon Spin. It's a kid's ride where you get into a 2-person car that spins and moves along a track through dark cartoon scenes. There's a steering wheel in the middle that lets you control how fast you spin. But let's talk about the car's design. There's a lap bar, but no seatbelts. There are no side barriers. And there's a huge cutout on one side for people to get in and out. It's a massive safety gap. On September 22, 2000, 4-year-old Brandon Zucker and his family got in line. Now, Disney had its own safety rule for this ride, and it's critical. The smallest child is supposed to be seated farthest from that giant cutout opening. Brandon was the smallest. He should have been placed on the inside seat. He wasn't. The cast members loaded him right next to the opening. Then came the second mistake. They lowered the lap bar, but according to the official state investigation, it was not fully lowered. There was a gap between the bar and Brandon's small body. A 4-year-old in the seat right next to a giant hole with a loose lap bar. You can see where this is going. The ride started. As the car spun, Brandon was thrown through the gap. He fell onto the track, and the car that had just ejected him rolled over him, folding his small body in half and pinning him underneath. For 10 agonizing minutes, Brandon was trapped. When they finally got him out, he had no pulse and wasn't breathing. The oxygen deprivation caused catastrophic, irreversible brain damage. Brandon Zucker spent the next 8 years in a vegetative state. He couldn't walk, talk, or eat. He was a prisoner in his own body. He died on January 26, 2009, at the age of 13. The Zucker family sued Disneyland, detailing Brandon's horrific injuries, the 8 years of suffering, and the mountain of medical bills. In the face of their own catastrophic negligence, Disney settled for an undisclosed sum. After the incident, the state of California ordered Disney to make major safety changes. They had to install a sensor-equipped guard around the bottom of each car, improve the lap bar design, and completely retrain their staff on loading procedures. It took a 4-year-old being crushed and spending 8 goddamn years in a vegetative state for them to fix a problem they should have seen from a mile away. The Terror Tram. Universal Studios, the place where you can ride the movies. But sometimes, the horror isn't just on the screen. Sometimes, it's waiting for you, right around the corner. Our first story takes us back to Halloween night, 1986. Universal Studios Hollywood was hosting its annual Halloween Horror Night special event. The main attraction? the Terror Tram, a nighttime version of the famous studio tour, where trams would drive through dark, foggy sets and scare actors would jump out and, do their thing. One of those scare actors was 20-year-old Paul Ribalde Brooks. It was his job to lunge at the trams, getting as close as possible to give the guests a good scream. But on this night, something went horribly wrong. It was dark. The trams were moving. Paul was working in the narrow space between two tram cars. He either lost his balance or misjudged the distance. He fell into the gap, right into the path of the moving tram behind him. The tram, weighing several tons, rolled over him. He was crushed instantly between the heavy vehicles. He died right there, on the tracks, in the middle of the horror show he was supposed to be a part of. The official cause of death was severe crush injuries to his torso and a presumed skull fracture. It was a horrific, tragic accident, a combination of poor visibility, moving vehicles, and the inherent danger of having actors working so close to the machinery. After the incident, Universal shut down its Halloween events in Hollywood for 6 long years. When it finally returned in 1992 as Halloween Horror Nights, the safety rules were much, much stricter. A tragic lesson, learned at the cost of a young man's life. The collapsing floor. Just a month after the Terror Tram tragedy, death visited Universal Studios Hollywood again. This time, it wasn't a guest or an actor. It was one of the people building the magic. On November 28, 1986, a construction crew was working on a new project on the studio lot. 2 workers were in the bucket of a massive 30,000-pound, about 13,600 kilogram, crane. They were high above a temporary work floor made of plywood. Now, I'm no engineer, but putting a 15-ton piece of machinery on a temporary wooden floor sounds like a bad idea. And, it was. The floor suddenly gave way under the immense weight of the crane. The entire structure collapsed. The crane plunged through the floor, throwing the 2 men from the bucket. One of the workers, whose name was never publicly released, fell onto the steel and concrete structures below. He suffered massive head and chest trauma and was rushed to St. Joseph Medical Center, where he was pronounced dead. His partner, miraculously, survived with only minor injuries. An investigation by OSHA later pointed to what everyone suspected. The temporary floor was simply not strong enough to support the crane. It was a catastrophic failure of planning and risk assessment. A man went to work to build a place of fantasy and dreams, and died because someone, somewhere, didn't do the math right. Just wow. The Mummy's Curse. We jump forward now to 2004, Universal Studios, Florida. The brand new, high-tech indoor roller coaster, Revenge of the Mummy, had just opened. It was a huge hit. But on September 21st, the ride's name took on a grim new meaning. A 39-year-old man from Apopka, Florida, was at the loading station, about to board the coaster. It was a normal day at the park, guests getting on and off the ride. As he went to step from the stationary platform into the coaster car, he missed his step. It was a small mistake, a simple loss of balance, but the consequences were devastating. He fell into the gap between the platform and the ride vehicle, dropping about 4 feet onto the hard, concrete structures below. He hit his head hard, really hard. He was immediately in severe pain, showing clear signs of a serious head injury. Paramedics rushed him to the Orlando Regional Medical Center for emergency surgery, but the damage was too severe. He died the next day. Investigators found no mechanical problems with the ride. It was a tragic freak accident, a simple misstep. But it led to a man's death and raised questions about the safety of loading platforms. After the incident, Universal made changes to the area, adding extra warning signs and visual markers on the floor to guide guests and prevent another fall. The Dragon's Bite. It's July 1st, 2009. The sun is just coming up over Universal's Islands of Adventure in Orlando. Before the gates open, before the first guests rush in, the park is a hive of activity. Maintenance crews are checking every nut, every bolt, every sensor. And on Dueling Dragons, one of the park's most iconic coasters, they're running test cycles. An employee, whose name was never released, was working that morning. He was in a restricted area, a low zone underneath the track where the coaster whips by at high speed. We don't know why he was there. Maybe he dropped something. Maybe he was taking a shortcut. But he was in the wrong place at the worst possible time. During a test run, one of the empty coaster trains came roaring through that section of the track. The employee was struck. He suffered multiple severe head injuries and was rushed to Orlando Regional Medical Center, where he underwent intensive treatment and a long recovery. After the incident, the park closed the ride temporarily and installed new fences and barriers to physically block off those restricted areas. It's a grim pattern we see over and over. A tragedy happens, and only then are the obvious safety measures put in place. The King's Toll. This next case is a little different. It's not about a mechanical failure or an employee mistake. It's about a hidden danger and a family's fight for justice. On December 10, 2016, Jose Calderon Arana, a 38-year-old businessman from Guatemala, was visiting Islands of Adventure with his family. They decided to ride Skull Island Reign of Kong, a big, intense 3D dark ride. The ride has standard warnings posted outside. If you have heart problems, back or neck problems, or are pregnant, you shouldn't ride. The problem? Those signs were only in English. Jose didn't speak English. He saw the pictograms, but they didn't convey the seriousness of the warning. He had a pre-existing heart condition. He got on the ride. After the ride, he told his wife he didn't feel well. Thinking it was just motion sickness, she suggested he rest on a bench while she and their son went on another ride. When they came back, they found him collapsed. He had suffered a massive heart attack. He was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. 2 years later, his family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Universal. Their argument was simple. Universal knows it has millions of international visitors who don't speak English. Why weren't the life and death warning signs multilingual? The family argued that the simple pictograms weren't enough to communicate the risk to someone with a serious heart condition. Universal, for its part, pointed out that their blog and some other materials were available in Spanish, but they didn't comment on the on-site signage. The outcome of the lawsuit was never made public, but it raises a huge question. In a place that attracts people from all over the world, how much responsibility does a park have to make sure its warnings are understood by everyone? For the Arana family, the answer was written in the most tragic terms imaginable. The Citywalk Showdown. Our next story doesn't take place inside a park, but right on its doorstep. Universal Citywalk in Orlando. A place of restaurants, shops, and nightclubs. On April 22, 2011, it also became the scene of a fatal confrontation. 33-year-old Adam Spencer Johnson was at Citywalk around midnight. According to police reports, he was acting disorderly and erratically near the movie theater. Off-duty Orlando police officers, who were working as security for Universal, confronted him. The details of what happened next are murky. The police said Johnson became aggressive and got into a struggle with them. One of the officers deployed his taser, hitting Johnson and sending him to the ground. They handcuffed him, but moments later, he became unresponsive. The officers tried to resuscitate him. He was rushed to the hospital, but he died. The incident sparked a huge controversy. Was the use of a taser justified? Was it a proportional response? Johnson's death became part of a national debate about the safety of stun guns, especially when used on people who might have underlying health conditions. While the legal liability fell on the Orlando Police Department, the death cast a dark shadow over Universal. It was a violent, public death that happened right in the middle of their entertainment complex. A grim reminder that sometimes the real world and its dangers can intrude on the fantasy. The final launch. This last one is tough. It's a story that's still unfolding, and it raises some of the most difficult questions about accessibility, risk, and who gets to decide what's safe. On September 17th, 2025, just after the grand opening of Universal's brand new theme park, Epic Universe, 32-year-old Kevin Rodriguez Zavala decided to ride the new high-speed dueling coaster, Stardust Racers. Kevin had a congenital spinal cord condition and used a wheelchair, but he wanted to experience the ride, just like everyone else. He boarded the coaster, secured by the restraint system. During or immediately after the ride, he was found unresponsive in his seat. He was rushed to the hospital, but he was pronounced dead. The medical examiner's report was chilling. The cause of death was multiple blunt impact injuries. The ride itself had, in essence, killed him. Now, here's where it gets complicated. Universal and state investigators said the ride was functioning normally. No mechanical defects, no malfunctions. The coaster did exactly what it was designed to do. But the lawyers representing Kevin's family tell a very different story. They claim that Kevin's head repeatedly struck the restraint harness during the ride, and that those impacts are what killed him. The case sparked an immediate and intense debate. Universal maintained that the ride was safe and functioned as intended. Disability advocates and guests argued that the restraint systems on these increasingly aggressive coasters are not suitable for people with certain body types or physical conditions. The man knew his own condition, but did he truly understand the risk? Did Universal do enough to warn him? It's a tragic and complicated case with no easy answers. A man wanted to experience the same thrill as everyone else. He wanted to ride the new big coaster, and for that, he paid the ultimate price. It forces us to ask a very difficult question. Where do we draw the line between accessibility and safety? And who gets to make that call?
Kaitlyn Lassiter, June 21st, 2007. Six Flags Kentucky Kingdom, Louisville, Kentucky. Low 90s, mostly clear sky, a short line on the Superman Tower of Power. Kaitlyn Lassiter, 13, had already ridden it once that afternoon with her friends. The line was still short, so they went again. That second ride mattered, because the hydraulic cable that was about to snap had been deteriorating for a while. Intamin, the Swiss manufacturer, had specified that technicians should inspect the cables with a cotton rag every 6 months. Six Flags had not followed that protocol. As the car climbed on that second ascent, a steel cable snapped near the top of the 177-foot tower. Witnesses heard the crack. One eyewitness told 911 dispatchers, "It went up and the cable snapped. I saw it go up, then it came back around and hit people." The operators heard it snap. They noticed the screaming change pitch. They did not press the emergency stop button before the car dropped. And it wouldn't have mattered anyway. The ride cannot be halted once the descent begins. The cable, swinging free, looped across the falling car's path and wrapped around Kaitlyn's legs as she plummeted 154 feet at 54 miles per hour. Both her feet were severed above the ankles. Her left femur was shattered. She landed at the base of the tower, sitting in her own blood, reportedly calm and quiet from shock, which somehow made the scene worse for everyone watching. A 911 dispatcher instructed a park employee to place the amputated feet in a clean plastic bag. No ice, no water, apply pressure, keep her calm. Surgeons successfully reattached her right foot. Her left leg required amputation below the knee. The ride was demolished during the off-season. 8 similar drop towers across the country temporarily closed for inspection. The family's lawsuit ended in a multi-million-dollar settlement. Six Flags Kentucky Kingdom itself shut down in 2009, partly due to its safety reputation. The ride had been renamed Superman Tower of Power and given a fresh coat of paint at the start of that same 2007 season. The cable failed in June. It had been there since 1995. Yoshino Kogawara. May 5th, 2007. Expo Land Amusement Park, Suita, just north of Osaka, Japan. Children's Day, the centerpiece of Golden Week, when every family in Japan descends on theme parks and the queues are long and the mood is festive and loud. Yoshino Kogawara, 19, a company employee from Higashi-Omi in Shiga Prefecture, is at the park with her friend Sayuri Furukawa, 20. They board the Fujin Raijin 2, a Togo stand-up roller coaster, 15 years old, more than a kilometer of track, speeds reaching 75 miles per hour. 20 passengers loaded for the run. Just another ride on a busy holiday. The axle on the second car had not been replaced or disassembled for inspection since the coaster's 1992 installation. Expoland's scheduled January or February maintenance check for that year had not been completed. Inside the metal, stress fractures had been forming across 15 years of load cycles. Investigators would later note that the axle's safety factor measured at only 1.6 to 2.8, against an industry standard of 10. At 12:50 p.m., as the train crested the second hill, the axle snapped. A sharp crack beneath car 2. Riders had no idea what it was. The second car tilted outward at roughly 45 degrees. Yoshino's head in the front row was driven into a maintenance catwalk guardrail at the side of the track. The impact was instant. The train, still moving, dragged her over 300 yards along the track before it screeched to a halt, leaving a trail of blood across the structure. Her body remained lodged in the wreckage when the coaster finally stopped. Her friend Sayuri, seated nearby, was seriously injured. 18 other passengers suffered fractures and whiplash. Yoshino died instantly. 3 former Expo Land officials were later charged with professional negligence, resulting in death and injury. Court documents stated they had detected visible cracks in the axle and continued operating the ride for commercial reasons. The park briefly reopened after 3 months. Nobody came. "We couldn't regain the people's trust," the company spokesman told the Japan Times when Expoland announced its liquidation in 2009. Yoshino's mother, Miyoko, said at the trial, "I don't forgive Expoland because it betrayed my daughter and other people who only wanted to have fun." Joshua Smurphat, August 23, 1999. Paramount's Great America, Santa Clara, California. The drop zone is a 207-foot free fall tower. You sit in a harness, get hauled straight up, and drop. Joshua Smurphat is 12, from Sunnyvale, and has mental and physical disabilities. This is his first ride like this. His height clears the minimum requirement. The operators strap him in. The shoulder harness on a freefall tower works on the assumption that the person inside it fills enough of the seat to be held in place. Joshua's frame was slight. The harness appeared secure during the check, but it was not properly fitted against his small body. The inspection was rushed. His specific fit was not verified. The ride had a perfect safety record, 0 prior incidents, no reason to flag anything. The car climbed 207 feet above the concrete. At the apex, as the car dropped, Joshua slipped free of the harness entirely. He fell the full height of the tower with nothing slowing him down. Massive blunt force trauma. He died at the scene. The ride was halted immediately. The park added dual harnesses and additional restraint verification procedures following the accident. No lawsuit details entered the public record. What the press had was the outline. A 12-year-old boy with disabilities on his first free-fall ride, a harness that looked correct and wasn't, and a perfect safety record that ended on a Tuesday afternoon in August. Gabriela Garin. Before we get to Gabriela Garin, we need to talk about May 22, 2004. Rye Playland, Rye, New York, the 1928 historic park used as a filming location for the Tom Hanks film Big. The Mind Scrambler is a spider arm ride that spins 2-seat cars in a darkened tent to flashing lights and loud music. That evening, 7-year-old Stephanie Dudonné wriggled free of the restraining bar, knelt on the seat, and fell. She died of severe head injuries. The park was not cited for violations. Officials announced plans to add seatbelts, a second attendant, and better lighting at the Mine Scrambler. 3 years later, none of those improvements were fully in place. Gabriela Garin, 21, had worked at Rye Playland since she was 14. 7 years. She had been there the day Stephanie died. She was the Mine Scrambler's manager and knew that ride, as the county executive would later say, like the back of her hand. She was a single mother to a 2-year-old daughter. On the night of June 29, 2007, near the end of her shift, Gabriela swapped briefly with the ticket taker and climbed into a car for one last ride. Impatient riders were already shouting for the ride to start. The new operator, his view partially blocked by the high seat back, started the Mine Scrambler. He hadn't seen that Gabriela was kneeling on the seat bench instead of sitting. He noticed within 20 seconds and killed the power. She had already been thrown from the car. Gabriela Garin died from her injuries. The county confirmed the promised second attendant had not been on duty that night. It was the 4th death at the county-owned park in 4 years. The Mine Scrambler was shut down for the rest of the summer and removed from the park entirely afterward. "She grew up in this place," her sister Ruby said outside the park, "and this place took her away from us." The Siam Park Flume. 2007, Siam Park, Thailand. A water flume ride, the kind where boats crest a hill and slide down into a splash pool, the most benign-looking thing a theme park offers. A woman in her 30s is riding with her group. The boat crests the hill, and then the power goes out. When the pump driving a flume ride loses power, the water flow that keeps the boat on track stops. The boat, now unpowered on a structure built entirely around constant water pressure, derails. This section was approximately 66 feet above the ground. The boat left the track and went airborne. It plunged 66 feet down into a combination of concrete and shallow water. The woman died from skull fractures, a severed spine, and drowning in the seconds after impact. 5 other riders were injured, some seriously. The park attributed the incident to an unexpected power outage, as if the absence of a backup generator was a force of nature rather than a maintenance decision. International coverage focused on the complete lack of fail-safe systems. No generator, no mechanism to arrest a derailing boat when the power simply stopped. Flumes look safe because the speed is low and the drop is modest, but everything about their design assumes the water keeps flowing. The woman in her 30s sat in a boat on a sunny afternoon and had no way of knowing that the ride's entire safety margin was a pump staying on. When it didn't, the boat became a 20-meter drop into concrete. Upgrades were mandated. The lawsuits followed. The park called it a blackout. Kings Island, June 9, 1991. Kings Island Amusement Park, Kings Mills, Ohio. This entry is different from the others, because the horror of this particular day doesn't concentrate in one person or one moment. It spreads. 3 people are dead at the same park before the afternoon is over. The first is Candy Ann Taylor, 32, a mother from Ohio at the park for the day. She's riding the Flight Commander, a ride that suspends passengers in seats and swings them outward in a spinning arc. Mid-flight, her seat restraint fails. She is ejected approximately 30 feet and lands on the pavement. Cervical fractures. Massive internal trauma. She dies at the scene. That would be enough for one day. It is not the end of the day. The same afternoon, 2 maintenance workers in their early 20s are carrying out repairs in a flooded section of the park. It had been raining. There are live electrical cables running through the maintenance zone. Wet conditions, live wires, workers in the water. Both men are electrocuted. They are found in the flooded area, the cables still live around them. 2 more deaths. Same park, same afternoon. 3 fatalities. 1 park, 1 day. The park faced significant OSHA fines for both the electrical violations and the ride restraint failure. Investigators confirmed none of the 3 deaths were unforeseeable. Wet weather around live maintenance wiring is a documented hazard, and a mid-flight restraint failure is a mechanical maintenance question. Candy Ann Taylor's name made the news. The 2 maintenance workers were largely reported as a footnote to the ride death. All three left the park in the same direction that afternoon.
Thanks so much for rocking with the channel for real. Hit that subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss a single one. And got a topic you want me to dig into next? Drop it in the comments.